Well, hello, and welcome to another Thrive Today webinar. My name is Nick Harang, and I want to say hello to those of you who are joining us live this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are, and also hello to those of you who are watching the recording at a later time. I'm really glad that we get to be together and get to learn and grow together with you. We have a great hour ahead of us today, as we're going to be talking about fighting fear, learning how fear disconnects us. We're going to talk about the several different kinds of fear that we experience and how our brains process these things differently. And we'll also give you some practical tools on how you can overcome fear and help those around you do the same. This morning, I am glad to be joined by my friend, Mr. Chris Coursey. Good morning, Chris.
Hey, good morning. I'm very excited for our time here. I just want to thank all of our friends for joining the fun. This is going to be, I think, a very special time.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I know many of you know Chris or have met him or been following him and Jen with Thrive Today. But for those of you who may be new, I want to introduce Chris. Chris and his wife, Jen Coursey, they are the leaders of the ministry Thrive Today. And for over 20 years, Chris has been creating and testing and refining these brain-based solutions that make relationships work or work well, work the way they are designed to. Chris is an ordained minister, he's a pastoral counselor, he's a published author, and he travels literally all around the world to teach and train people in these life-giving and life-changing relational skills. So again, welcome, Chris. Glad we get to be together today.
Yeah, it's going to be good. This is a topic, Nick, that I think will resonate with all of us at some level. And I think this will really, and I pray this will really speak to our hearts, because you know what? Fear is not fun, especially when we don't know what to do with it. So hopefully we can shine a little light on this big topic today.
Yeah, and you know, this being the week that Halloween is happening in our culture, it's a very relevant topic. But as you said, Chris, the fact is that all of us as human beings experience fear at some level on a somewhat consistent basis. And whether we're experiencing mild stress in the workplace or some of us struggle with panic attacks sometimes. I mean, really, there's a whole spectrum of what fear can be in the human experience. But it is fear, and it is our brains and our emotions responding to things in a way that we need some help with. So that's why I'm excited. We're gonna talk about some of the different kinds of fears and how our brains process these. And it's also one of those interesting things that we have a culture that has a kind of a mixed relationship with fear. Most of us don't enjoy being afraid of losing our job or being afraid of some important relationship, going through a hard thing. And yet we might turn around and pay big money to go, get the living daylight scared out of us at a movie or something. So sometimes we have this push-pull towards fear. And so I'm looking forward to talking about some of the things that, Chris, you and I have been talking about leading up to this webinar. So you and I kind of worked through some questions we would like to talk about and discuss. And is it okay if I just lead off with our first question?
Let's jump on in. I'm excited for the adventure here.
Well, great. Well, our first question is just a kind of a generic overview of fear. So can you give us a little bit of an understanding of just what fear is, and yeah, take us into it.
Yeah, well, Nick, as your slide here says, fear serves a purpose. One way of looking at fear is it's an expression of an insecure attachment. So we have a couple of hardwired fears like loud noises and falling. Our survival circuit, our fear center in the brain has opinion about those things. We are born with those things. But you know what? Most of our fears actually are learned from experience. And this creates some really complex problems as we get older. So we're going to talk a little bit about this today. But, I want people to I want us all to think about this. The fear the fear centers in your brain actually serve a purpose. They're trying to do a job, and God put these things in there for a very specific reason. But unfortunately, for lots of good reasons that we'll touch on today, fear actually can work against us. And as Christ followers especially, this is a pretty big topic because fear ultimately is about self-preservation. And the Bible seems to put a very interesting twist on this, that, we're to take up our cross, a symbol of death, and follow Jesus, whereas we're hardwired for self-preservation. So it seems a little contradictory at face value that we have to die in order to live. And so we're going to look a little bit about how fear plays into these things. But ultimately, fear is about preserving self. And so your fear reaction is really a response to something that's threatening your joy, threatening your well-being. So your brain has very specific opinions about anything that you deem to be threatening to who you are, to your health, to your body, to your well-being. And because I come at this with kind of a solution mindset, like, okay, here's what's going on, but what do we do with all of this? I find working with a lot of people in recovery over the years that, fear is also, Nick, a breadcrumb trail. And so fear tends to tell a story.
Hmm.
Um, and again, depending on the type of fear response that it is, that will impact how this plays out. But basically, fear, we can see it as a breadcrumb trail. Um, there's something my brain is still trying to resolve when I find that I have these consistent fears. And so many times we get into like an arm wrestling match with our fears, and we're just trying to like, you know, be Sylvester Stallone in over the top and just, make a move and try to win this arm wrestling contest. But we tend to lose because fear is a very powerful thing. It's a very powerful motivator. And many of us just get discouraged because we struggle with the same fears, which then we feel like failures. We feel like we're bad. We feel like something's wrong with us. And I hope that we can correct some of that stuff today, because really fear is just your brain's trying to solve a problem. And when something's not resolved, it doesn't update. We're just stuck on this kind of hamster wheel going round and round. And many of us feel that. And it's pretty discouraging when we wrestle with this kind of stuff. But Nick, there's basically kind of two kinds of, there's three different kinds of fear reactions in the brain that we're going to look at. But as far as your brain's memory system is concerned, you have this explicit memory system where you're aware of why this is there. So you recognize the fear. So I remember being bitten by a dog, my neighbor's dog, golden retriever of all dogs, go figure. But I got attacked by the neighbor's dog over the fence, and it bit me. And my survival circuit had a strong opinion about that. I did not appreciate this dog biting me. So I wanted to avoid the dog, right? But I've noticed after that, I had this kind of I didn't feel warm and cuddly with this neighbor's dog anymore after that happened. But I was aware of that. I knew that, okay, I don't want to get close to this dog because, last week he bit me. So the explicit memory system is when you're aware of what's going on. You have a story, you have the information, and it's very clear. Wow, this is why I'm afraid, because this happened to me when I was younger. The more insidious memory system when things go wrong is actually the implicit memory system. And this is kind of the hidden fear. This is the part of the iceberg, Nick, that's still under the water. We can't see it, but we sure feel it. And so this is the hidden feelings, the hidden fears that really direct my thoughts, my feelings, my decisions, my behaviors. So I'll avoid things. I don't really know why. Maybe my brain will make up information. And that would be Dr. Carl Lehman talks about the verbal logical explainer. That's where your brain is trying to explain something. And it's often because of these hidden feelings, they're there, but they're kind of invisible, right? And so they direct my life in many ways. And so what happens is when we have these kinds of fears, we just justify them. So if you say, well, Chris, I notice whenever we talk about finances, you seem to have a really strong fear response. And maybe I justify it. Oh, no, I'm just trying to be a good steward, Nick. I don't have any fear here. This is about being a good steward. So we tend to kind of almost justify these hidden fears. We just don't fully understand what's going on. And what's interesting to me is that fear not, don't be afraid, is one of the most repeated commandments or commands in the Bible. So whenever God or his messengers show up, frequently you'll hear this, fear not, don't be afraid. And so I think that this is something God finds that we really need a little help with, and for good reason. So we're going to look at that today.
That's really good. Yeah, in my study of the Bible through the years, I've just seen that pattern from Genesis to Revelation. God has to address our fears, and so often he says, fear not, for I am with you, or I will, guide you in a situation.
Yes.
And so often he's the answer to our fear, which I know I'm jumping ahead of us, but it is interesting that, the Bible speaks to the real life situations of people in every generation. And that topic of fear comes up in, I think, just about every book of the Bible.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does. This is just one of those topics that's so fundamental to the human condition.
Yeah.
So,
That's right. Well, you told me that, fear is something that our brain is processing, and it tells a story. So can you explain the difference between how our brain processes it in the different hemispheres of the brain?
yeah, so I find this very significant as we kind of explore this topic of fear, because your brain actually has a number of different fear responses, and there's different areas of the brain that are involved in these fear responses. So I wanted to look at that a little bit today, because I think it'll validate our reality, because there's times where we think we have fear under control. We're doing pretty well, we're staying above the surface of the water, and then something happens, we get triggered, and we just kind of notice that we're back in a fear state. So there's actually good reasons for these things. And I hope that that's conveyed today, that there are good reasons for these reactions. So there's obviously two halves of the brain. One half, the right hemisphere, is primarily nonverbal. And the left side is very interested in a lot of explanations and information. And so kind of the fear that's on the left side of the brain, which is our logical, rational, part of our brain that just likes to explain everything. We can almost call this like a left brain fear. And that's when information is actually what activates anxiety. So I've heard Carl Lehman give what I think is a great example for this, where he said that when this type of fear is produced, it's basically based on the information that's come my way. So if you're on an airplane and the pilot comes on, right? I spend a lot of time in airplanes, so I think about these things. But if you're on an airplane and the pilot comes on and he says, "Everybody put your seatbelts on, this is going to be really bad." Right? So you hear that information and suddenly you're like, "Wait, what? Like, what's going on here?" So when you hear information that's troubling to you or that's scary for you, your left brain starts kind of a fear response, but it shows up with my thoughts and my thinking. So we kind of identify this as anxiety. It's my left brain, it's my logical brain is trying to resolve what's scary to me. And the way that the left hemisphere will resolve things is by information. So I might try to talk to myself and say, well, maybe it's not that bad, right? Or I'm not alone here. There's other people around me. So we'll try to resolve it with more information oftentimes. And if that works, then that's really good. That was a very clean left hemisphere fear. If that doesn't work, then we would need to look more on the right side of the brain, which is where the emotional control center is. So this leads us to our next point, which is the what we call level 3 fear. So at Thrive, we actually have, and the life model has 5 levels of processing in the brain. And so there's some levels that are above that I'm aware of. They're above my consciousness. And there's some levels, Nick, that are really deep. I can't track what's going on there directly. So this level 3 is basically a part of my brain that still I'm aware of what's happening here. So I know that I'm afraid and I want to do something about it. So we'd call this level 3 fear. And basically this is when processing of whatever's scary is climbing in my emotional control center. It's climbing high enough that I'm conscious of what's happening. I'm aware that I'm afraid. And this kind of fear is the fear that I want to share. So if I'm something's scaring me, something's worrying me, we might say, I want to share it. So Nick, I might call you and say, hey buddy, you know what? I need some prayer today because I'm really worrying about something. Mm-hmm. So this is the fear that let's share this. I'm still relational in this fear. I can still kind of remember what's important in some ways. I can feel it and I can just say, hey, can you pray with me? Because this is what's going on. Mm-hmm. But if you drop in this emotional control center, you actually drop down to the survival circuit. The survival circuit is subcortical, which means it's deeper in the brain. And the survival circuit is very opinionated and it's actually very fast. So this is a part of the brain that basically responds without asking our permission. So we react before we know what's really happened. So if you're walking on a trail, we have beautiful trails here in Michigan, and it's fun to walk this time of the year and look at all the pretty leaves. So if I'm walking with my family, enjoying the leaves and the beauty, but I see something squiggly, right, down by my feet, this part of my brain, my survival circuit, will go, oh, wait a minute. And I might like hold my family back and say, wait, what's going on here? This is the part of the brain that really reacts in 1/10 of a second. So in a foot race, this part of the brain always wins against the level 3. Level 3 is much slower. This part of the brain is really fast, Nick. And so what happens?
That helps me if I can just break in. I was in Alaska years ago, and in a national park where there's grizzly bears and there's viewing platforms and all that, but there's places to fish too. And you've been trained, do not run from bears, because that can trigger their like chase thing, and they take your tasty meal.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was in a part of the river where I didn't think there were any bears, and I turn around and there's a bear like 10 yards away.
Wow.
And I just start running, and my left brain is like, don't run from bears, but my feet just kept moving as fast as I could to try to get up to that viewing platform. I think my level 2 won out over the rest of my brain.
Yeah, Nick, that's a perfect example, because what happens is your level 2 had an opinion, right? Because your level 2 says, is this good? Is this bad? Is this scary? So your level 2 said, this is bad and scary. This is not good. This is not huggable. This is, I've got to flee. So that's a great example, and that often happens to us in situations. We react and we don't quite understand why we're reacting. And basically, this part of the brain's job here is to basically preserve you. So it is always working, even when you're sleeping. It's still working. And this is, as we'll talk a little more about this in a moment, but this is when you're watching a scary movie, or you're watching a movie and something startles you. If you mute the movie, you won't jump. But this is where the power of sound and music, this part of your brain is very sensitive to loud noises and music that's kind of creepy, like the Jaws, done it, right? This is the part of the brain that's very sensitive to that kind of stuff. So very important. So that right there, we have 3 different basically types of fear as far as your brain's concerned. But fear is also something, as we mentioned, Nick, you see in the Bible. So we see times where people were feeling afraid and they needed help. And of course, I think when we talked about these questions, I thought of Israel with Goliath, right? And then everybody's afraid. Everybody's hiding from this big, scary giant with a very large sword. And I just heard a song about this on the radio this morning, where, David brought a rock to a sword fight, so David shows up and he brings, finds some stones. And so something more was going on in David's brain that was not going on in some of the Israelites' brain. So we would say they were stuck at their survival circuit, whereas David was remembering who he was, more importantly, remembering who God was. And that actually helped him to face that fear. But we see other examples in the Bible where people are so afraid, they're just so non-relational, it's not even funny. So in the case of, when I thought about this, I thought of when Jesus is with the disciples and an army shows up to capture him, right? And Mark is the only one that tells the story about a young man who was in a linen, and he tried to run away, and somebody grabbed the linen and he ran away in his birthday suit.
Right.
That to me is a really good example of this survival circuit fear. Like, it is not relational. It's not logical. It doesn't say, hey, you know what? I just lost my clothing. I should do something about this. This part of the brain says, oh, I'm going to die here if I don't get out of here. I have to run. So I thought that was a really good example of that. And I heard this I thought of this really good point with Adam and Eve that we kind of touched on earlier with in the garden. You see Adam and Eve had this very secure relationship with God. They walked with God in the cool of the day. And then suddenly, right, the predator tempts them and they eat the forbidden fruit. Next thing you know, they're hiding from God, right? They're hiding from the very one that they could have ran to for help, for assistance, right, for comfort. So you see, what was a secure attachment suddenly became an insecure attachment. And what's the motivator? It's fear. And so fear often is when our brain is not working in a secure base. If you look at this from an attachment perspective, right?
Okay.
Secure attachments is the world's predictable, the world's a safe place because my father's in it, right? I have a secure bond. Insecure is my needs aren't going to be met here, or I really want to be close to you, but I'm afraid of you. Or I just can't get enough of you and I just, I want more. So we see fear comes into the equation, and that's a pretty powerful force.
Hmm.
Um, and I think many of us can relate to that. We want to be close to God, but maybe there's something that we're actually afraid of about getting too close. What will he think? What will he say? What will he do? Or will he even show up? So fear is a very powerful thing, not only in our relationships with each other, but in our relationship with God. And I heard this great quote actually this morning from Jim Wilder, and I wanted to use this here. Jim said, the fear, and this wasn't even talking about this, by the way, it just came up in a completely different conversation. But Jim said, fear of the Lord coaches you into the love of God.
Hmm.
And, I thought, wow, because we think about what does it mean to fear God, right? When we're thinking about these different kinds of fears. And how I kind of think about this particular topic is God's basically saying, hey, if you're going to be scared of anything, be afraid of me. Don't be afraid of all this other stuff. But yet, and then when we're saying, okay, God, I am afraid of you. He says, okay, but now we don't use fear as a motivator here.
Hmm.
So now that I've got your attention, no, we actually use love as a motivator, and love is actually more powerful than fear.
Hmm.
So the fear of God, the fear of the Lord should always coach and propel us into the love of God. So that is the motivator we're after here. I mean, fear is good for, a little bit of time, but it's not a good long-term motivator. It's
Yeah.
just not good for us, Nick. And so with this left brain fear that's based on information and logic, this is I feel anxious about something. So my brain is using words to try to fix something. And I feel like I'm just going round and round. This is usually some of the easiest kinds of fear to resolve, because if it's at this part of the brain, usually just a little more information will help. So if you're on the airplane and the pilot says, oh, this is going to be bad, put on your seatbelt, more information would be bad. And so if you get more information from the pilot that says, hey, sorry everybody, I didn't mean to scare you there, it's not a big deal, we're fine, we're past the turbulence here, you could take off your seatbelt. So more information actually fixes that problem, right? Which is good. So this is where cognitive behavioral therapy that tries to change thought patterns and behavior patterns, just kind of change the way we see something, change the way that we think. This is where those kinds of things can be very helpful, and that's a very common, popular option for a lot of people who are in their counseling process. But I want to highlight, if information doesn't fix this, then you're at a different part of your brain on the right side, deeper in the brain, in the control center, and that's where we need some different solutions. So now that we would make that shift, more information doesn't fix it. I'm still finding myself, I'm afraid, I'm worried, I'm stuck, don't quite know what to do. If I'm at this level 3, this part of the brain on the picture, Nick, it's that looks like a banana. Jim will call it a mental banana almost, because it lights up like a banana on brain scans. So if this part of the brain is feeling some fear, I know I'm here basically because I want to share it with you. I don't want to be alone in this. I just want to feel understood by you. I just want you to get what I'm saying and what I'm feeling. So here I'm still relational. This would be the guidance in Romans 12:15. Weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice. So this is still in the domain of, I remember who I am, I'm relational, but I need some help. And this is where I want you to share it with me. And so as long as I notice I'm still relational and I want someone to share it with me, that's pretty clean on this part of the brain. But if that doesn't work, the feelings become intense and I can't manage those feelings anymore, then we know, okay, I have to look a little deeper here in the brain, because now I'm getting into the survival circuit, right? And the survival circuit is really, really intense. So I feel like I'm going to die here, right? I feel like if I don't get whatever it is that I need, I'm going to die. So very powerful force right here. This is where you get into, like, it can be irrational fears. So I remember my wife had a fear of heights, and we went up a very tall lighthouse in Michigan, and this part of her brain basically took over And the fear was she was going to fall through the little grates in the steps. And she's like, I know this isn't rational, but I felt like I was going to fall through that little hole. And so we notice this with phobias, different things like that. That's part of the brain you cannot talk down. So no matter how much information you throw at it, it actually can make it worse, right? Because then I'm just feeling misunderstood and invalidated.
Right.
It just makes everything worse.
Right.
So that's where a lot of us like to use the solution of words. And if I just give you more information, you'll be fine. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. Something more is needed here. And so this part of the brain is not relational and just really not open to information. But this is the part of the brain, Nick, that's looking for threats. Am I safe? So we see in a lot of cases of like post-traumatic stress, when this part of the brain is running the show, I am always assessing for threats wherever I go. And it pulls my attention. It demands our attention. So this part of the brain doesn't ask your opinion. It just will demand your attention. And this is where, as I said, phobias, fear of heights, and so forth really become problematic. Something has gone haywire here. And then I want everybody to look at this from a perspective of processing pain. When your brain hasn't processed pain, that stuff becomes traumatic. That traumatic content basically gets stuck in your brain. And when it's stuck at this level and it hasn't processed all the way up the control center, I have very intense reactions that take my breath away and alarm me and startle me or startle everybody around me. So very, very powerful kind of a thing. And just like when I got bitten by the neighbor's dog, Nick, this part of the brain does remember everything. And so it'll just say, hey, this is a dog. Dogs are bad. Now, as we're going to look at a little later, Nick, there's actually something here we can do about this. But for now, I think I'll just leave that right there.
No, that's really good. Well, yeah, no, I want to make sure we have time to get to solutions. So I think we'll skip the next slide and then good stuff there. But maybe help us to understand a little bit more about how our brains track storytellers' brains, and then we'll get to how fear disconnects us and then solutions.
Okay, so what happens here, one of the points with fear is stories can be very powerful. So stories are when my brain doesn't quite know who I am under conditions of fear, right? So I would ask myself, hey, who do I know that just seems like they're really a non-anxious presence? Who is that? So I might say, hey, Nick, I noticed, you don't seem to scare easily. In fact, I've noticed you seem to be kind of a courageous fellow. So, you know what, would you mind telling me some stories about times that you felt afraid and how you handled that? How did you recover from that fear? Or how did you stay relational in that fear? And one of the things that we now know about the brain, which is really fascinating, is when you tell me a story, what'll happen is my brain is basically mirroring your brain. So if you were to scan our brains during the storytelling, the parts of your brain that's basically lighting up as you're thinking about your story and you're telling your story, what you would see is a lot of those same areas in my brain would also light up. So I'm kind of mirroring, matching your brain. And if this is a story about joy, for example, you're telling me about a joyful time from your week, then my brain is responding as though I experienced that joy. So I am almost, we could say, kind of internalizing the story. So when these stories are redemptive, and they're joy, and they're kind of the good stuff. These are the good stuff stories. That's becoming kind of part of my character, we could say. It's like seeding into the garden of my character and my identity. So stories are very impactful. But what's interesting is if you're telling me times where you were afraid, you were stuck, you were overwhelmed, or just something that's really traumatic that you haven't recovered from, what's interesting is my brain will also map what's happening in your brain. So in a sense, I'm kind of downloading that as though it's also my experience. So that's why we really want our stories to be redemptive. That's the word I'm looking for, redemptive. Like if you've ever watched a movie and it ends in a way that doesn't get you back to joy, you're like, what?
Yeah.
How could they leave us hanging like this? Right? So one way of looking at these stories is your experience becomes my experience. And then, if we think about, did anybody in the Bible ever tell stories? Did Jesus ever tell stories? Did God ever have Israel tell stories and pass on stories to the next generation? So stories can basically mold and influence our thought process in a similar way that experience does. So that is, like, in my mind, that is really exciting, because that gives us Christ followers opportunities to share our stories. And it's a way of being light and being salt in this world. So Nick, that's pretty exciting.
That's good. Well, and I'll just share that when I learned about the power of what we call 4+ stories at the Thrive training that I attended, my wife is actually really great at implementing this stuff. So she's had us around the dinner table tell different kinds of stories because we realize the stories are what shape not only our brain, but the brains of those who follow along in the story. So even just this last week, we just told a story, each of us around the dinner table, of a time that we were nervous or a little bit afraid, and how we got through that and how we got back to a good place, which of course is called returning to joy. And sometimes my kids are like, oh, I don't want to do this. But then mom tells a story, dad tells a story, and then another kid tells a story, and then, hey, I got one. But we're sharing stories of, hey, we went through something hard, but here's how we processed it, and here's how we came out the other side. And I know now from modern brain science that is, like you said, that's kind of seeding their identity center. That's putting things into their mind that they can now pull from, of like, hey, I know how to get through hard things or embarrassing things or times when I'm angry, the big 6 difficult emotions we talk about, because I've got a whole bank of experience, not only mine, but the experience of people that are my people.
You know, and there's a lot of gold in what you just shared here, Nick. And one of the points I really want to highlight to everybody today is you said how your wife will use kind of low intensity, moderate level emotions. So
Right.
notice she's picking a low emotion so everybody can stay present. Where we get ourselves in trouble is we tell these big scary stories, or these stories about loss and attachment pain, and then we basically lose everybody. So that right there, Nick, is a sign of experience in my mind, that you guys are choosing stories that's manageable for everybody, and you're doing this in a way that's really fun. You know, stories are free. We have access to these like night or day.
Mm-hmm.
This is gold.
That's really good.
So I'm glad
Well,
to hear that.
we're moving towards the time where we want to get to questions and answers in a
Yes.
little bit, but we want to talk about how fear disconnects us, and then about some solutions. So can you take us through this?
Yes. Well, you know what? Fear will gladly disconnect us, and fear will rob us of the good stuff. So let's talk about that a little bit. One of the reasons fear disconnects us from other people is basically fear turns off your relational brain. And so when you're afraid, what'll happen is, if you can't regulate these feelings and they become unmanageable, it quickly shuts off your relational brain. Your relational brain will quickly shut off just focusing on what you're afraid of, focusing on negative emotions and so forth. So part of the reason we become quickly disconnected is, once your relational brain is offline, your relational circuits are down. What that means is your hands are tied relationally. So you quickly lose the very resources you need to navigate this terrain. And so we kind of feel like we're stuck in quicksand. When we're afraid, it's miserable. We don't know what to do with it. And one of the worst things in my mind about what happens when our relational circuits go off, our relational brain is offline, is we lose an awareness of God's presence.
Hmm.
And when we lose an awareness of God's presence, we lose the sense of God's peace. And honestly, then we feel like we're all alone. Nobody sees us, nobody hears us, nobody cares. It's not very fun. What also happens, Nick, is that we lose access to our joy files. So when our relational circuits are off, we can't easily access the good stuff that we normally might be thankful for. So normally infants say when they're afraid, ideally mommy or daddy comes and brings the comfort, or grandma and grandpa. When the caregivers aren't available, then with a secure attachment, the infant will just think about the parent. I just think about mommy
Hmm.
and mommy's face, and all of a
Wow.
sudden it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to be all right. So relational circuits off, we kind of lose access to the good stuff, and then that just kind of compounds the difficulty there.
Hmm.
And the way that your brain works is, your brain always looks back to predict what's going to happen next. So you're always looking in the rearview mirror to try to predict what's going to happen ahead of you. And when you have unprocessed fear, unprocessed pain back here, your brain just assumes, predicts, I'm going to have more hard stuff and scary stuff up here. So I developed this lens of fear, basically. It's very easy to develop that lens of fear. Now, that doesn't have to be the end of the story, as we'll get to soon. But that is a very important reminder for everybody. When you've got stuff back here that's not resolved, doesn't have God's peace, God's presence, your brain will just assume and expect fear, expect scary stuff.
Yeah.
And so your brain puts a lot of resources to navigate and manage fear. Fear basically demands your attention. It demands your energy. It demands your resources. So fear tells your brain, hey, pay attention. This is very important. And post-traumatic stress disorder is actually one of the classic examples of your brain is still trying to solve a problem when people have been traumatized. And so what happens is your brain is basically stuck with post-traumatic stress. It needs to get unstuck. But that's kind of what happens when fear goes unprocessed. It just basically, it zaps us, Nick. It will demand our resources. It demands our energy. And it's just not fun. Fear adds cortisol into your bloodstream, and that just is not good over time at all. So there's a ripple effect, we might say, when fear is not processed and pain's not processed.
Wow. Well, let's make sure we get to some of those solutions for fear then, and not leave everybody hanging, because that would be not a good place to leave people.
That's right. That would not be fun.
Let's talk about some solutions, Chris.
All right. So what do we do with all this fear, right? What do I do when I recognize, you know what, I have a fear that always robs me? Maybe it's a fear of getting too close to people and they might hurt me or reject me, or it's a fear of finances and I just feel like I'm not going to have enough. There's no end to what our fears can be. All right. So now what do we do? So kind of the first thing we want to do, Nick, is identify the iceberg in the water so we don't run into it. Okay, where is the iceberg? So we're going to identify the fears that robs our joy and our peace. So one of the questions I'll often ask people is to just, hey, what is the fear that drives you? And we're going to see if the left side of the brain is aware of this, or the level 3 of the right side of the brain. So I'm kind of looking for, do people have a narrative? Like why is the fear there? What's the best evidence for the fear might be one approach. And then what we're going to do is we identify it. You know, I approach this as fear tells a story. Fear solves a problem. There's a breadcrumb trail. So we're going to start talking to Emmanuel about this. Emmanuel is the God who is with us. And thankfully, Emmanuel is well aware of these intricacies. So we're going to talk with Emmanuel about what's going on and kind of invite Emmanuel into this process. We're also going to share this with our community, with people that we trust, people that we feel safe with. Because the goal here, Nick, is not to feel alone. As we're going to look at, the moment you feel alone, you've just created the toughest conditions for your brain to navigate fear. So we're going to invite Emmanuel into this place. And, you know, Emmanuel is the Prince of Peace, and peace is his signature. So the absence of peace is an opportunity for his peace. So we probably have some landmines that need to be disarmed. So we're going to invite Emmanuel to basically help us to see what's going on. What do I need to know here? But more importantly is be able to process whatever needs processed. If this is a fear that's anchored in pain, the beauty is, as we resolve and process the pain, what you'll find is the volume gets turned down on the fear. And we're going to talk about some resources here shortly about, you know, how can I learn more about the Emmanuel process? But this has been the easiest, the most efficient way that I even know for people to disarm landmines. And we do this in the safety of God's peace, and we do this in the safety of people that we trust. And one of the very helpful things with fear is your survival circuit has one solution in the brain that can override it. And I like to call it, and with various resources for the life model, it's called the captain. And so we engage the captain to take over for the fear. So basically, I notice I have a fear of dogs. Then my captain comes online, would say, hey, thank you for that fear. I'll take over from here. So I love dogs. You know, so I don't have to stay stuck with, they're the dog, it's going to kill me, bad. I can actually override that. And so one of the ways we can update that basically is through stories. So we learn and we hear stories that basically say, hey, how do you handle your fears? And the captain is in charge of our body. So oftentimes helping people to pay attention to their body, help people to breathe, scan their body, where's tension in my body. We do a lot of quieting exercises at Thrive that are really helpful for engaging the captain. But the goal is to override the fear. I will not die, but live, says the Lord. So I know this is scary. I know this is threatening, but I'm not going to stay here. So, okay, we're going to override it. And so we stay relational. We remember to breathe. And we engage our relational circuits to quiet our bodies. And so this often helps with somebody else that we trust who can sit with us and stay present. Takes a little capacity to do this, because if I'm really afraid of something, what I need is someone who's not afraid of what I'm afraid of. So I need you to stay present with me, help me stay anchored. And what's very exciting about this process that we now know is the role of the vagal nerve, which is it's called the wandering nerve, and it kind of from the base of your brain into all your major organs, this nerve just is kind of connects all over your body, and it's in charge of your heart rate and your breathing. So what happens is the vagal nerve actually plays a pretty important role in how calm I am or how anxious I feel. And so there's ways we're starting to learn about stimulating the vagal nerve and how that can actually produce a very calming effect. And there's exercises called Shalom My Body. We have it on our YouTube page. If people want to see Dr. Wilder demonstrating this, which is Chris Coursey -Thrive, you can see Dr. Wilder and practice these Shalom My Body quieting exercises. And voice tone is actually, we now know, is very important for your vagal nerve. So what a calm presence, a calm tone, and a slow voice tone can actually have a calming effect. And Stephen Porges, who's just this great guy that's releasing all this great information about the vagal nerve, he has a very interesting quote here I thought everyone would enjoy. He basically says, children are measurably calmed by prosodic or sing-songy speaking, also known as motherese. And so just hearing, that motherese kind of voice, that's glad to be with the little one, it's soothing, it's comforting. So the voice tone that's not too high, not angry, not rigid, but just calm, comforting, can have a very helpful quieting effect.
Yeah, I just read something recently that FBI negotiators with hostage situations, like one of their number one tools in the tool belt, is to use a slow, calm, kind of like smooth jazz voice almost.
Yeah.
Because the people on the other side of the door or the other side of the phone are just so amped up. And
that's right.
As you said, with mirror neurons, we can calm the people around us by the way we are relating to them. And so these FBI guys have to calm themselves, be that calm voice tone, and they see dramatic transformations sometimes.
That's a great point, Nick. And I have to give credit to Jim Wilder. 20 years ago, when I started teaching, my voice was so anxious. I had a horrible speaking voice, and Jim and Kitty Wilder would also, Chris, you're not living in your voice here. You got to work on that voice. And all of us could start paying attention to our voice. What does your voice say about you? And is it a calming presence when people hear it, or does it sound like fingernails on a whiteboard? Like, I've had to work on that. I have to say it really changed so much about better expressing my heart with other people. And Nick, there's one other point here I just want to make for this slide, and that is basically we got to help people build some capacity. We got to learn relational skills. You mentioned earlier returning to joy, telling those stories, learning to stay my relational self. This is a gold mine. We have a gold mine of resources that people can actually easily do from their home, and you'll talk about that here shortly. But build capacity with joy, start practicing important relational skills. That will basically rewire your brain when your brain is used to a fear.
Well, Chris, I know I've already seen a few hands raised. We got some questions coming in, but can you not maybe cover all of this? Is there one or two things you want to say about what's not helpful before we go to Q&A?
Yeah, you know what, the sky's the limit on this one, but I'll highlight a few. All of us have probably had very unhelpful responses when we feel afraid. One of the worst things you can do is minimize somebody's fear. Don't minimize it. Don't try to fix it. Listen, validate, comfort, join them. basically anytime I feel alone in my fears become bigger. So anything you can do to help people feel connected, to feel seen, to feel heard, you're anchoring them in the midst of a storm. You're anchoring them. And you know what? Flies gather around fear and unprocessed pain. And so I would do it injustice if I didn't acknowledge, you know, spiritual warfare it's a real thing, and just paying attention to, you know, the enemy likes to use fear as a tactic. So holding on to Emmanuel's peace and just talking to Emmanuel about anything that seems to be hindering my peace, you got to do that. You got to keep that dialogue going. Pray without ceasing. I'd say that's interacting with Emmanuel right there. So those are the highlights that I want to make. And just, man, we have shame around fear. We don't need to have feel shame. A lot of us we're afraid. We don't want to acknowledge our fear because it doesn't feel like a manly kind of a thing. That just actually trying to be strong makes us weak. Just let's look for tender responses. Let's be tender with each other in our weaknesses, and look for Emmanuel's peace.
That's really helpful. Well,
that would be the highlight I think I want people to really hold on to here.
No, it's really helpful, Chris. And I know I've seen a few hands raised, and I want to give people a chance now to, what would be better for us is if you could just type your question into the Q&A window. We will funnel some of those questions to Chris to try to answer as many as he can before the hour is up. And while you're starting to type those things in the Q&A window, I want to just make sure that we get to some next steps for those of you that want to go further in what we've been talking about today, and building your relational capacity, learning some of these brain-based skills to quiet your big emotions, to understand the different levels of brain processing, and how to apply helpful interventions. Because, you know, we need the right solution for the right level of brain function that we're experiencing. So let me just mention that, you know, as we're, well, first I'll mention the blog. So if you go to our Thrive Today website, you will see that there's a blog, and you can sign up for that. So you'll get these come into your inbox every week or two. And Jen Coursey is the primary author, but she's had a number of other folks through the years and through the months that also write articles that are centered around applying these relational skills in everyday real life, in your workplace, in your marriage, with your kids, with your friends and family, with your walk with the Lord. There's a few that you might want to look at if you're wanting to go more on this topic of fear. And so just this year, there's been these three that have come up. Where is Emmanuel when I'm choking? You can just search and find these. And Thunder and Terror, you know, we got those were both, Chris and Jen's boys had some real big things come up, and they were able to help them process through this in a very helpful way where they don't stay stuck at that level 2, which, as Chris said, we'll carry that forward until that gets healed. And then Jen recently, just this month, wrote about her 47-hour labor story, which is slightly overwhelming and fearful to say the least. And yet she said she never felt closer to Jesus than in that time.
And Nick, let me jump on that. I just want everybody to know I was there. And,
thank you.
I was more traumatized by that than she was. I needed to get a little Emmanuel healing after that ordeal. She had our baby after 47 hours and says, I want another one. And so that's really give God the glory. The Emmanuel training is that good, and relational skills. And so these are resources that we've been able to apply as a family. And
that's so good. Yeah, no, so there's tons of blogs. I mean, they're all so rich. They're short, and yet they demonstrate what the relational skills look like in practice. So of course the blog is free. You can check that out. And if you are wanting to get more experience in actually practicing these skills, then the way to get training is to come to our Thrive training tracks. They happen several times a year. So if you'd like, you can look into that on the website. I'll give you the link in just a moment. But these are the premier training opportunity to learn relational skills in relational environments. What we know about the brain is that our left brain can learn logic from reading and bullet point lists, and we can understand something. But the way we actually learn relational skills is by practicing them in relationship. And so these are right brain relational skills that are faster than your conscious thought, that shapes your character, shapes your personhood. And those things can be read about in a book, but you can only actually learn them in relationship. And I can speak from experience that my wife and I haven't gone to 2 of the tracks now. We're coming to track 3 next summer, Chris, in your hometown of Holland, Michigan, that this is changing us. This is deepening our peace and our joy. It's affecting the way we parent. We're just having all these light bulbs come on and like, oh, okay, we can do this. And we're seeing this peace and joy increase in our home, with our children, and our marriage. So this is really life-giving. And I want to give you the dates just because as we're coming up on a new year and people are thinking about their work schedule and vacations and trips and whatnot, if this is something interesting to you, you may really want to begin praying now about, hey, God, do you have something for me, for my life right now in this area in 2020? So we've got our first one coming up in March in Peoria, Illinois. That's just outside of Chicago a little ways. And then not Holland, Europe, but Holland, Michigan, which is beautiful in July, I must say, because I was there this July with my wife, with Chris and Jen and the Thrive team. It's a wonderful, wonderful time. So you can check that out at thrivetoday.org/thrive, or just go to thrivetoday.org and you can see the bar at the top. You'll see training and you can read about it. There is obviously a time investment. These are 5-day trainings, kind of like 9 to 5, very joyful, very peaceful, but your brain gets a workout. And as you're at that incredible environment, just the coin begins to drop and you begin to, oh, I see, and oh, I get it. And you begin to see the shifts as the months go by and looking back and like, oh, I'm more of a peaceful person now, or oh, I can handle that big emotion that used to kind of overwhelm me before. So this is something definitely worth considering. It is an investment of time. It's an investment of money. But, we live in the age of the quick fix. We're like, oh, I've had this problem for 20 years, but, give me a pill, or I want to talk to a counselor for 1 hour and be done. And what I've learned is that, man, patterns that have taken me a lifetime to develop might take a few years of intentionality to begin to reverse and to see new patterns develop. But it can actually move along fairly quickly as you kind of take that, Jesus, grab me by the hand and lead me approach, and you'll see a lot of change in your life. So, Chris, we got some Q&A, but any quick responses to that, of just encouragements for folks thinking about attending Thrive?
Yeah, the common response is before people come to Thrive, they just do the math. Yeah, I got to take a week away. It's 5 days. I got to travel. I got the cost. I've got all this stuff. Then they attend the training. I've never heard a complaint after people do the training because it's that impactful. Sometimes we just need to get away and create some new pathways for joy and peace and learn relational skills. So it's a very special, meaningful experience, but I just validate, when you do the math, you're like, well, this is a big investment. Can I afford to get away or use up my vacation time? And since doing this for, 17 years now, never heard a complaint afterwards. I think that says something.
That really does. That really does. And when people go to these things, they say, man, if I knew it was going to be this good, I would have brought more people with me.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, wanting to make sure we get to some questions. One question is, Lynn asked, will this webinar be available for me to share with folks? And I want to let you know that every time we do a webinar, if you sign up ahead of time, even if you miss it, you'll always be sent the link, usually within 24 hours. And there's a way you can forward that on to people and they can sign up after the fact and register, and that gives them access to download it on demand. So yes, please share this, because we believe these relational skills are something that's missing in society, and there's a lot of band-aids out there, but what we have here we think is really helpful. So please feel free to share this. Joe, our good friend, Pastor Joe Johnson says, do you deal with anxiety the same way as fear?
Yes, I can always expect a good question from Joe. I like Joe. He's a good guy there. So great question, Joe. I just want to say, if it's left brain fear, which would be anxiety, it's clean if information fixes it. So we talk about it, and after talking about it, somebody's like, oh, I feel better. That's what I needed. Okay, that was what I'd call a clean left hemisphere fear, anxiety. If talking about it, more information actually doesn't fix it, then I know it's probably anchored on the right side. So level 3 means I need to share it, I need to quiet it, I need to share it, and I need to quiet it. So we're actually with people and a manual, of course. We share it, we quiet it. I need to feel understood by you. I need to be validated, comforted. And of course, if it's anchored in unprocessed pain, we invite a manual in to show us that. If it's level 2, you kind of know level 2 because it's going to be very intense. And this is where I've had people curl into a ball in my office. I've had people scream. It's very non-relational, very intense. And this is where we remain a high capacity mind, non-anxious presence. We help people feel safe and quiet it. So when my wife was frozen on the stairs of the lighthouse, I had to if she felt comfortable, thankfully. So I held her hand, I got close, I used my voice, very quiet. We helped her quiet. And as she felt safe, level 3 came on, level 4 came on, the kind of like the lights came on at the other levels, and then she could override, and then we could navigate it. And then later on, she was able to disarm the landmine that was there. So yeah, I hope that
Good.
helps. That's a really good overview of track 3, actually, right there.
Yeah, that's right. Kevin asks, can you explain how anxiety about driving for a young person might work, as well as increase in paralyzing fear after an accident? So they
Yeah,
have anxiety
so
about driving a car.
that's a great question, Kevin. So how it might work, let me see if he's saying, can you explain how? Okay, I mean, if I'm driving, odds are I probably got some activity from the survival circuit that's bubbling over here and I'm feeling anxious. So a lot of the times, if again, it's the survival circuit's got an opinion and I'm feeling anxious about it and I'm worried I'm going to mess up, I'm worried I'm going to accident, I need to quiet. So how do I feel safe to quiet, pause to quiet? Now, obviously, if you're driving and you're that nervous, I would prefer to do this before we're driving. Let's get some peace. As far as the accident, that's your survival circuit is very clear about why that was scary. So your survival circuit has a very strong opinion with that paralyzing fear. That would actually sounds a lot more like post-traumatic stress, which would need lots of quieting, lots of capacity. And let's get a manual into the center of that, because there's probably some very intense stuff that needs to be processed. So with even the blogs that Nick, you shared, might be helpful at a surface level. Let's learn more about the Emmanuel process, because I would suspect you've got that survival circuit's anchored in some trauma right there.
Yeah. Well, when there's trauma, that really can be a transformative thing to experience Jesus in that memory, healing that memory, and then that part of your brain can move past that pain point, that stuck point.
That's right.
Ruth asks, what's the best way to introduce this life-giving information to adult children?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's good books, I mean, Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You was just a very good intro resource. I wrote a book on relational skills called Transforming Fellowship. That would be a great intro. My friend Amy Brown and I wrote Relational Skills in the Bible, which goes deeper into a lot of the practice. If your adult children are married, 4 Habits of Joyful Relationships would be a good resource. That's a very good intro, kind of like just getting their feet in the water. Visiting our website, looking at some of the blogs or the skill thoughts, and then probably we actually have online courses that are a great resource. Dr. Wilder does a whole lot of good teaching, unpacking all of this stuff. That would probably be one of the great resources as well.
Gina asks, what is your tip for when I'm at work, I feel fear, I'm not acting like myself because of the fear, but I'm in back-to-back meetings, so I don't have time to really be myself and quiet myself?
Yeah, good question, Gina. So what I would recommend is when you're not at work, let's start talking to Emmanuel about this. What's going on? One of the ways I help people with this is when we feel some peace from enjoying God's gifts or God's presence. We might say, well, Lord, what's going on in Gina when this happens? What would you like Gina to know about why this is coming up? And let's double check. Let's make sure it's not anchored in pain or anchored in unprocessed pain. And the quieting would be huge. So even if you don't have time to do the self-care that you want to do, breathing, trying to stay calm and relaxed. And we breathe from our belly, not from our chest, right? Because up here is going to make you more anxious if you breathe from up here, but we breathe from our belly. And just try to do the quieting that you're able to do. But when you're not at work, that's the golden window of time to probably go into that a little more.
Yeah, and I would just add that, even going to the bathroom and going to the stall and doing a little bit of shalom for my body.
Yes, definitely.
Just, I don't have time, I got meetings. Well, hopefully you can take 2 or 3 minutes, slip away to the restroom or some, closet or somewhere.
That's right.
Take some deep breaths and, do the best to quiet yourself. So just
that would be ideal right there. Let's get those relational circuits on, just 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Yeah, that'll help everything.
Well, we have a few more questions and a few more raised hands, and we're out of time, but don't be afraid. because we are here for you. So go ahead and write us an email at info@thrivetoday.org, and we will try to respond to your questions as best we can this week, and just jot back a little response. This has been such a helpful webinar. It's not surprising to me that the questions keep coming in, and people want to apply this to their everyday lives, Chris. And again, I just want to say thank you to you and Jen that have said yes to the Lord, who's called you to kind of go down this road of specializing in understanding how our God-given brains work, how to create these relational brain solutions for relational needs and situations, so that we can live out of that place of joy and peace that God designed us for. So any final words before we sign off here?
Well, I just want to thank you, Nick, for shepherding and guiding us here today. And I just want to thank all of our friends who are with us live or watching this later. You know what? There's a lot here. You kind of got the fire hose experience. I hope you can watch this again maybe and kind of go through it. And the good news is put it into practice. That is ultimately what your brain needs to learn is I will not die, but live. And we serve a risen Savior. So just hold on to that as we put this into practice and walk it out daily.
That's right. And that would be my encouragement is, really God is our hope. Thank God for tools. Thank God for ministries like Thrive Today. But really, we need to say, God, you're my hope. I put my hand in your hand. Would you lead me step by step into the freedom and the wholeness that you have for me? And Thrive is here to help as best we can. We've got the free blogs. We've got books. We've got other resources. And, of course, the Thrive training. So we're here to serve you. So let us know how we can do that. And again, on behalf of myself and Chris and Jen, Coursey, and the entire team at Thrive Today, I just want to say thank you for joining us. We really hope that this was helpful, that this was a time of not only informing, but also equipping you with some tools to begin to put into practice in your life so that you can begin to live less and less out of the different forms of fear that might be you're familiar with, and more out of the joy and peace that God has for you. So with that, thanks, Chris, again. Appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you. Good to be with everybody.
Thanks to everybody else who joined us today. God bless you, and hopefully we'll see you again on another Thrive webinar soon.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.
All right.